What's going on, everybody? Welcome back once again to The Haunted Beard. My name is Jake. Well, I've been making my way through the entire Nightmare on Elm Street series, and today I'm talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. And this actually happens to be the first time I've ever watched it, never seen it before, so here are my initial thoughts. Let's talk about it. Nightmare on Elm 5, The Dream Child came out in 1989, and it continues the story of Alice, who is now pregnant, as she finds Freddy Krueger attacking her through the sleeping mind of her unborn child, hoping to be reborn into the real world. Overall, I actually had a decent amount of fun with this. It starts off pretty strong. The first dream sequence you get, which is really what kicks off the movie, is Alice goes into the shower and gets attacked by Freddy Krueger in the shower. I think there's a little bit of a nod to Hitchcock's Psycho there. And the shower ends up filling up with water, and she falls through the door and gets, transported through this portal into this insane asylum. And I just really like the execution of that scene with her in the shower, a little bit different, and then going into a completely different setting. That's something that this movie does, is it just kind of drastically changes settings in some of the dream sequences, which I really like. And so she's now in this insane asylum. We don't really know what's going on. It's really creepy and eerie, just kind of some cool lighting during this sequence. And we find out that we're almost kind of doing a bit of a flashback, sort of, as we see Amanda Krueger, who ends up getting assaulted by all these inmates, which is something that was mentioned a little bit in Nightmare on Elm 3, so we kind of get a little bit more details of that story. She gets attacked by all these inmates, and that gives birth to Freddy Krueger. Now, after this opening dream sequence, we get a scene in the real world. It's a graduation scene as we see Alice and Dan. They're planning on this trip to Europe, and then it introduces us to some of our new characters. You've got Greta and Mark and Yvonne. And this scene here isn't great. It really just kind of goes on for too long and is just kind of boring. There's just not really much reason for it to go on for as long as it does. It doesn't really give us anything important other than to just introduce us to the new characters. And the new characters in Dream Child are, they're just not really that great. They're okay. They're pretty kind of standard horror movie characters. You've got Greta, who's kind of the pretty beauty queen. You've got Mark, who's kind of the nerdy guy who likes comic books. And then you've got Yvonne, who's kind of the athletic, smart person who's, hard worker sort of thing. And that's really all there is to the characters. So there's just not a whole lot there to the new characters. After this sequence, though, we get another dream sequence as Alice is actually walking home from the graduation. She looks over at a playground and sees the little kids in white singing 1-2 Freddy's coming for you. And then we are just transported into the dream world. And this whole sequence here I really enjoyed and I think is quite effective. Just some of the editing here is that it's really disorienting and kind of confusing, but in a good way. It changes locations and settings, just like kind of these quick jump cuts as you're kind of somewhere different than you were. And it just has this sort of disorienting feel to it that I think really works. Is she's back in the insane asylum. This time she's on the stretcher getting, wheeled into this operating delivery room. And then all of a sudden she's off of the stretcher and we see Amanda Krueger is on the stretcher getting ready to give birth to Freddy. And then Demon Baby Freddy comes out and it's just this gnarly looking little creature. And is it kind of cheesy? Yeah, but I'm kind of just on board for it. I guess I'm just a bit of a sucker for some old school practical special effects kind of thing. And yeah, he looks kind of ridiculous. I guess he's supposed to, but I'm just kind of on board for it. I liked it. They didn't overshow him. I don't think they showed it too much. They kept a little bit of an element of mystery there. And then we end up getting transported back to the church, which was the conclusion of part 4. It's that same setting where Demon Baby Freddy is trying to get back to his, I think it's like his red and green sweatshirt, and that's going to kind of help resurrect him. And so he ends up getting resurrected, and this big old thing comes out of the floor, and then you get Freddy Krueger in this kind of cool silhouette in front of the stained glass windows and stuff, and just kind of some cool visuals there. And I really had a fun time with this whole dream sequence. I really thought it was really good and really effective. So what ends up happening in the story is that Alice ends up getting attacked and is affected by Freddy while she's awake, and she can't figure out why. She's trying to figure out what's going on. And that leads to this scene. It's kind of a bit of a lazy sort of exposition scene where she has all of her friends together and she's trying to explain the history of Freddy Krueger and filling them in on all the details, all the stuff that we as the audience already know. And of course, they think she's crazy, right? It's kind of that classic cliched scene of, this is really happening. No, you're crazy. And so we get that scene, and that is sort of a recurring thing throughout this movie, especially with the character of Yvonne, one of Alice's friends. Man, there's probably 4 or 5 scenes there where Alice keeps getting attacked by Krueger and having all this crazy stuff happening, and she goes to Yvonne and is trying to tell her and convince her, and Yvonne's just like, no, you're crazy. She's like, no, but he's real. She's like, no, you're crazy. And like, no, he's real. Snap out of it. No, but he's real. And it happens like, I think 4 or 5 times, just so repetitive, and I feel like her character could have almost been completely removed because they go to that well so many times, it just kind of stops the flow of the story. So what ends up happening is during a couple of Alice's dream sequences, she is visited by this little child named Jacob. And the big reveal there is that Jacob is actually her son, the child that she is pregnant with currently. And she finds out that the reason why Freddy has been able to attack her and affect her while she's awake is that Freddy's actually influencing and attacking Jacob while he is in her womb, and that's why Freddy is getting to her even when she isn't sleeping. And so I kind of like this idea, as ridiculous as it is, or I mean it is ridiculous, but it kind of works here given the rules that the movie establishes, that Freddy's able to get to her because of her baby. And that ends up leading into one of what I think is a pretty disturbing scene where Alice goes in for an ultrasound. So she's at the doctor's, and you actually get a scene that literally goes inside her womb, and we see her unborn baby inside of her, and you see Freddy Krueger attacking her unborn baby. And man, I don't know if it's just because I'm a parent and have a kid myself, but man, this scene I thought was just disturbing. Just the idea of Freddy Krueger attacking your little baby inside of you is just horrific and messed up. And so kudos to the writers for coming up with that idea and going there. But yeah, this is just a whacked out scene that I won't soon forget. I want to talk about a couple kill scenes, particularly Greta's and Mark's. And one of the things I think this movie should be commended for is that I think it is pretty ambitious, at least in these particular kill scenes. This is now the 5th film in this series, and at this point, you'd almost expect things to get pretty repetitive. Like, it's pretty easy to just give us the same old and not do anything new and just, keep churning out the same formula. But I appreciate that there is, I think, a level of ambition to both of these kills. And what I mean by that is that they definitely feel different than any sort of kills that we've gotten in this series so far. Now, in a way, I could critique them by saying they almost feel like they don't even really belong in this movie or in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And I think that's maybe a fair critique to a degree. But for me personally, I always value ambition and just trying something different than just giving us, again, the same old type deal. And so these kills definitely stick out. They almost feel like they don't belong, but I really kind of appreciate just trying something new and different. And I think that they, in the end, are memorable. When it comes to Greta's kill, and she's the pretty beauty queen, she's at the dinner table sequence, and Freddy shows up and literally like gorges her to death. And it's gross and really off-putting in a different kind of way than any of Freddy's other kills. And of course, he has a couple of his one-liner quips during this that I'm not much of a fan of, but they're okay. But it just kind of sticks out. It's a different type of kill from Freddy than we've seen before. And then she kind of has this interesting part where she like pops through the refrigerator door into Alice, so then Alice can kind of see what's happening and that she's now being attacked. And so there's kind of an interesting element to it there. But just from a visual standpoint, and I thought just this concept of everybody at the dinner table just sitting there and kind of laughing at her just adds this kind of really weird, eerie vibe to it. And so it is a gross and off-putting kill, but I think it is a memorable one. And so I appreciate that they tried something different. Now, Mark's kill is interesting because I actually wrote down in my notes that it feels that this doesn't even belong in this movie. It feels like this kill belongs in a completely different film. And then I was reading up on the IMDb trivia, and the director himself felt the same way. He's like, this kill doesn't really belong in this, but I guess the director was such a big comic book nerd that he just had to put it in there. And you know what? I respect that. And I'm glad that we got to see his vision come to life, even if it doesn't feel like a typical Freddy type kill. And while this one doesn't feel like it really belongs in a Nightmare on Elm movie, I appreciate the effort. I appreciate just kind of the creativity, the uniqueness there, and just trying to do something different. And this kill is actually pretty cool, and it's just got a nice visual element to it as Mark gets sucked into a comic book. You have this cool aspect of it where everything's black and white except him, and he's got this really bright, colorful shirt on, and then Freddy goes into like Uber Freddy mode, and Mark turns into this superhero who, you know, shoots Freddy. And I just really like the whole visual presentation of this, and I just thought it was a unique and different creative idea. And so I think in the end it worked for me, and I liked it quite a bit. Now, I mentioned just a minute ago Freddy's one-liners during Greta's kill. Bon appetit, bitch. I was kind of afraid that with having just watched part 4 and seeing the transition of Freddy into this kind of cool character who's delivering these one-liners after every kill, I was afraid they were going to even take that to the next degree. But they didn't really do that with this. I think they actually brought it down a little bit from part 4, and so I was happy to see that. So yeah, he still got some of his one-liners and stuff, but it's not as bad as I was expecting it to be, and it doesn't really hurt the tone. Some of that comedy, especially with part 4, kind of just, I just didn't really jive with it, but I was glad that they kind of dialed it back a little bit in part 5. So what ends up happening in the story is that Alice, they find out that they have to get Amanda Kruger because she's the only one who's able to defeat Freddy, and Alice has to go in to save her son Jacob from being killed by Freddy. And so the whole ending sequence is a bit of a mixed bag for me, as it goes back to the same setting as where part 4 concluded in that church. And from a visual perspective, I really like this. They do this cool thing where it looks like this M.C. Escher drawing, the crazy stairs, and so they've got all these characters walking on these stairs that are like upside down and backwards and from all these different weird angles and perspectives, and it's really disorienting but really kind of cool, and I really liked it. I thought it was just kind of a cool element they added to the dream sequence there, and so I really liked that. Where it started to lose me a little bit though, and I feel like it starts to become a little bit convoluted, is they end up freeing Amanda so she can come out and defeat Freddy, and then Alice is wrestling with Freddy, and then you just get a whole bunch of really messy, confusing stuff that I just didn't really understand. Alice ends up like pulling Freddy out of her, and then somehow Jacob ends up getting some of Alice's powers, and then he ends up having to be the one to defeat Freddy because that's what Amanda tells him, and then he turns Freddy-like, which that just isn't great. That whole little part, I just thought just didn't really work very well. But anyways, and so he ends up having to defeat Freddy, and so he ends up just like puking on him, and then Freddy turns back into the little demon baby fetus, and then he is defeated. And it's just like, I don't really know what the heck just happened there. So yeah, the whole ending is a bit mixed for me, but all in all, I actually had a pretty decent time with this. I think there's some fun to be had with Nightmare 5 Dream Child. You know, like I said, the characters, with the exception of Alice isn't too bad. She's a pretty decent character, but the other characters are just, there's just not really much there. Some of the acting in the dialogue is not great, and but for the most part, the kills and the dream sequences I think are pretty solid, and there's some fun to be had here. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised a little bit. I kind of expected this to be another step down from part 4, but I actually had a pretty decent time with this. So I think overall my grade for this, I'm probably going to be at like a 6 out of 10. I wouldn't say it's great, but I had a pretty fun time with it. So those are my thoughts on Nightmare on Elm 5 Dream Child. Next up, we have got Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and this will also be a first-time watch for me. It'll be interesting to see. I'm aware of this movie's reputation. For the most part, I know people are not big fans, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it'll be a first-time watch for me. I'm looking forward to it, I think, and we'll see what happens. So Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare is up next, and we will see you then on The Haunted Beard.